I was just raising my glass at my daughter's birthday when she snatched the microphone, humiliated me in front of everyone, and then she slapped me. Not once, 15 times. Each blow wasn't just on my face, it was on every sacrifice I ever made for her. As the room stayed silent, I sat there bleeding inside, but also remembering a folder locked away in my drawer, the house deed with my name on it. She thought I was broken. She didn't know I was about to sell the very house she lived in while she was still at work. What happened next shattered her pride more than her hand ever could. Stay with me until the end of this story, and tell me in the comments which city are you watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel because what came after will leave you speechless. The night air in Asheville carried the faint chill of autumn, leaves crunching beneath the shoes of neighbors as they filed into my daughter's house. The place gleamed with decorations, balloons, streamers, a cake big enough to feed a small town. She had spared no expense, and from the outside, it looked like a celebration of family. On the inside, though, there was a current running beneath the laughter, something sharp and dismissive whenever her eyes met mine. I stood quietly near the back at first, hands folded, listening to the hum of chatter. A few friends from the neighborhood nodded politely, but most of the attention circled around Carla. My daughter. She carried herself like the hostess of royalty, tossing her hair back and smiling at every compliment about the house she lived in, the one I had paid for years ago. Pride should have swelled in my chest, but instead an unease settled in. Every whispered remark, every glance, felt like a reminder that I wasn't the man of the house anymore. When the moment seemed right, I lifted my glass of wine and rose slowly. My knees ached, but my voice was steady as I started to thank everyone for coming. Before I could speak a full sentence, Carla swept past me, quick as lightning, and snatched the microphone from my hand. "Dad, sit down," she said, her voice sharper than the crystal stemware. The glass slipped from my fingers and crashed to the floor, splintering into pieces that glittered under the chandelier. The laughter and chatter stopped dead, a silence so heavy it felt like another weight pressing me down. My heart hammered, not from the fall of the glass, but from the way her words stripped me bare in front of them all. Whispers buzzed through the room, like bees circling something wounded. Then a guest, someone I had known for years, lifted his drink and smirked. "Here's to the old man," he said. "May he finally learn to let go." Laughter rippled after the words, low and cruel. I stood there, heat rushing to my face, my throat tight. My dignity felt like that shattered glass scattered for everyone to step on. Memories came, unbidden nights I had worked double shifts to put her through college. Mornings I had built this very home board by board. Every nail hammered with the thought of giving her a future. All of that, reduced to this mockery and dismissal. Was all my giving worth this? The thought pulsed louder than the laughter, echoing in my chest. A father's sacrifices, erased in a heartbeat. Carla looked at me then, not with love, not even with tolerance, but with a glare that warned this was only the beginning. Something darker lingered in her eyes, a challenge waiting to unfold. I steadied myself, tried to retreat back to my seat with what little grace I had left. But just as I lowered into the chair, the room tensed again. Her hand lifted in the air, slow, deliberate, and then, as I steadied myself to sit back down, her hand rose in the air. The sting of her palm still hovered in the air when silence swept the room. For a moment, all I could hear was the faint clinking of glasses being set down on tables. Then the heat spread across my cheek, sharp and humiliating. Carla's eyes locked on me, daring me to challenge her. The first slap had startled the room, but the second came before I could even catch my breath. A ripple went through the crowd, gasps swallowed, whispers ignited. My jaw tightened, yet I sat frozen in the middle of it all. Her hand rose again and again. 3, 4, 5. By the time she reached 10, no one was counting out loud, but I could feel the tally building in every sidelong glance, every nervous cough from the guests. Each strike was louder than the last, echoing off the walls, echoing inside my ribs. The wine I had spilled earlier still glistened on the floor near my feet, and every time her hand landed, I thought about how quickly dignity can be shattered. Just like that glass. 15 times. 15 humiliations. By the last one, I barely registered the sting on my skin. It was the weight in my chest that crushed me. When the final blow fell, Carla stepped back, exhaling as if she had just completed a chore. Around us, people shifted uncomfortably. Some stared at their shoes, some turned their backs. A few smirked as if enjoying a scene from a bad play. But not a single soul stepped forward. Not a brother, not a cousin, not even one of the old friends who used to praise my sacrifices. Their silence cut deeper than her hand ever could. My lip was bleeding, the taste of iron sharp in my mouth. I pressed my tongue against it and closed my eyes for a second. Memories crowded in nights working overtime so Carla could attend college. The mortgage I shouldered alone after her mother passed. The years I went without so she could have more. All of it reduced to this spectacle, to her hand across my face in front of the people who once looked at me with respect. I sat back down slowly, as if lowering myself into a pit I dug with my own devotion. My shoulders sagged under the weight of shame, and yet underneath it all, something stirred. It wasn't resignation. It wasn't defeat. It was a fire, the kind that had kept me alive through decades of struggle. She thought those slaps were the end of me, that she had crushed whatever dignity I had left. But in truth, every strike lit something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. When she turned her back, satisfied, the room exhaled. I stayed still, quiet, blood at the corner of my mouth, heart pounding like a drum of war. The thought pressed against my skull. Unshakable, this wasn't over, not by a long shot. She walked away, confident she had silenced me. But as I wiped the blood with the back of my hand, one truth became clear. She had no idea what she had just unleashed. The night air in Asheville felt colder than usual when the front door closed behind me. The party noise had faded, but its echoes clung like smoke to my clothes, to my skin. Silence met me in the living room, a silence too sharp to be comforting. The faint tick of the old wall clock seemed louder than it had in years. I paused by the hallway, eyes landing on the photograph of my late wife, Evelyn, perched on the mantel. Her smile in that frozen frame looked as if it knew something I didn't, perhaps a warning, perhaps a reminder. Her words came back uninvited. Promise me you'll always protect the family. Luther. That vow used to feel like a compass. Tonight, it pressed on me like a weight. The chair by the window creaked as I sat, and for a long while, I stared at the glass in my hand instead of drinking from it. One slap would have cut deep enough. But 15, each one stripped away another layer of dignity I thought could never be touched. I raised a daughter, built a life, held my head high through loss, and yet in front of neighbors, relatives, and strangers, she made me less than a man. Memories slipped in, as if summoned by the sting still lingering on my cheek. The night I signed away my savings for her law school tuition. The weekend I worked double shifts just to fix the old car she drove to her first job. The ring I bought her for her wedding, knowing it cost the retirement I'd dreamed of. I gave her the best years of me. Tonight, she returned it all in the count of 15 strikes. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and whispered into the empty room, "Why?" "Carla." A soft knock startled me. It was Sylvia Harrow, my neighbor of 3 decades, her gray coat draped over her shoulders. She didn't have to ask what happened. The whispers had already spread across town faster than wildfire. Her eyes told me she knew, and worse, that she pitied me. That pity cut deeper than any of Carla's slaps. "Do you want to talk?" she asked gently. I shook my head, forcing a thin smile. "Not tonight, Sylvia." She lingered a moment, then placed a small covered dish on the table. "For later, you shouldn't sit in the dark on an empty stomach." Her voice cracked slightly before she turned to leave. The door closed again, and I was back to my silence. I poured another drink and set it beside me. My eyes drifted to the desk in the corner, to the drawer that had remained locked for years. Inside was a folder I'd nearly forgotten yet tonight. It pulsed in my mind like a beacon. Carla thought humiliation ended me. She thought my silence meant defeat. But she forgot I was the man who built her world brick by brick. Pride might be gone, but power still sat under this roof in ink, on paper, in deeds with my name stamped across them. I rose slowly, the joints stiff but steady, and crossed to the desk. The drawer slid open with a groan. My fingers brushed across the worn folder, the one I hadn't touched since Evelyn passed. For the first time that night, and for the first time in years, a smile curled at the corner of my lips. The morning after the party, sunlight pressed against the blinds like an unwelcome visitor. The soreness on my cheek throbbed with every move, a quiet reminder of the 15 slaps that had branded me in front of neighbors, friends, and family. Sleep had been shallow, broken by echoes of laughter and the sting of my daughter's hand. Yet as I sat up, the fog of humiliation gave way to something sharper. A stack of folders rested on the table where I had left them last night. My hand hovered over the worn manila cover, the one with my name neatly typed above the title Property Deeds. There it was, solid proof that not all control had slipped away. They thought I was a man with nothing left but stories and silence. They forgot I still held the strings of the very roof over their heads. I pressed the folder flat with my palm, whispering to my late wife's photo on the wall. "Mary, you always said dignity isn't given. It's taken back." By the time I dressed and walked across the yard to Carla's kitchen, the ache in my face had dulled, but the ache in my chest had sharpened. Carla was at the counter, stirring sugar into her coffee like the night before had never happened. She didn't even glance up when I stepped inside. Her indifference stung almost more than her hand had. "Carla," I began, my voice steady, calm, sharper than I felt. "Last night crossed a line. You humiliated me in front of everyone. That can't happen again." The spoon clinked against her cup, a sound so casual it made my jaw tighten. She finally turned her head, eyes cold, lips curling as if I were a child whining about chores. "You embarrassed yourself, Dad. Maybe if you knew when to stay seated." None of that would have happened. Her words carved deeper than I expected. But I didn't flinch. "I'm warning you. You will not strip me of my dignity again." The silence that followed carried the weight of a storm. That was when Marco entered. He strolled in like he owned the place, in his pressed shirt, with the smug half-smile that always made my gut twist. He leaned on the counter, kissing Carla's cheek as though to mark his territory. "What's all this noise?" he asked, his voice dripping with mock concern. His eyes cut to me. Old man giving another lecture. I didn't move. "I'm telling Carla to respect the man who built this family's foundation. I've earned that much." Marco chuckled, the sound low and cutting. "Respect, Luther. You're old, weak. Times have changed. You had your run. Now it's our turn." His words were like gravel underfoot, grinding down any space for peace. Carla folded her arms and nodded toward him. "Marco's right. Dad, you need to accept your place. This is our home now. Things are different." I looked at her. My daughter, The same little girl I once carried to school when she twisted her ankle. The same child who once begged me not to leave her alone in the dark. Now she stood there, eyes hard, siding with a man who had never sacrificed a thing for her. In that moment, I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't shout. My silence was my weapon, my memory flashing to the deed tucked in the folder at home. They thought this was their home. They thought wrong. Marco laughed as he turned away. Grabbing his keys from the hook, Carla kissed him lightly, dismissing me with the tilt of her chin. I stepped back, the sore spot on my cheek flaring again, not from her hand this time, but from the weight of restraint. They think my words are nothing, I told myself, eyes narrowing as I walked toward the door. But silence cuts deeper than any shout. I left without slamming the door. I didn't need to. The secret in my possession would do all the slamming soon enough. Carla called me 2 days later. Her voice was unnervingly smooth, as if the past days hadn't been thick with silence. "Dad, why don't you come over? Let's talk." Calmly this time. The word calm clung to the air like smoke. I could hear the rehearsed tone, the subtle performance she had no doubt practiced in the mirror. Still, I went. Not because I believed her, but because some part of me knew this wasn't a battle I could avoid. Her house was warm, sunlight cutting across the polished wood floors. She had made coffee, set it on the table, pretending hospitality. I sat, my face still bearing faint marks from the slaps she had delivered not long ago. She didn't mention them. Instead, she folded her arms, studied me as if I were a stubborn tenant she needed to evict. "Dad, we need to be realistic," she began, her words carefully measured. "You're not young anymore. It's time you let me and Marco handle things. You don't have the energy to manage a house, finances, any of it." Her voice dripped with a cold kind of pity, the kind that cut deeper than anger. I leaned back in my chair, waiting for the mask to slip. It didn't take long. "You're stubborn," she snapped, her calm shattering like that wine glass the other night. "Old, irrelevant, stuck in the past. You make everything harder than it needs to be." I felt a surge of heat in my chest, but before I could answer, Marco strolled in. He didn't knock. He never did. He poured himself a drink, smirk tugging at his lips. "Carla's right. You've had your time, Luther, but that time is over. You should just sign everything over. Make it easy for everyone. Isn't that what a responsible man would do?" The audacity nearly made me laugh. Nearly. Instead, I sat up straighter, my voice low but steady. "You both think respect is something you can toss aside like an old receipt," I said. "But I earned it the hard way working double shifts, patching up your cars, writing tuition checks when I should have been saving for my own years ahead. I gave more than either of you will ever understand." Carla rolled her eyes, but Marco's smirk faltered. For the first time in a long while, I didn't let the silence consume me. "You can insult me," I continued, "humiliate me, even strike me. But respect is not negotiable. I won't sit here and be erased." Carla slammed her hand on the table. "If you don't let go, we'll cut you out. Do you hear me? Cut you out of everything." I leaned forward, meeting her glare with one of my own. "You can cut me out of your life, Carla, but you'll never cut me out of what I built. That house, those deeds, the sweat in every wall and floorboard that's mine. Not because of a paper, but because I laid every brick of my life down for it." For a moment, the room went still. Carla's chest heaved with fury. Marco looked away, and I stood. My hands didn't shake, my voice didn't crack. "I've drawn the line," I said quietly, "and I won't step back over it." Their silence followed me to the door. Behind it, I heard Marco mutter something, Carla's voice rising again, but none of it mattered. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking away defeated. I carried something louder than their voices. My decision. My fight. The morning sun spilled through the blinds, but it didn't warm the chill inside me. The house felt different, too quiet, almost as if it knew something had shifted between me and my own daughter. Carla hadn't called, hadn't texted. Marco's smug laugh still echoed in my ears from that last confrontation. Their silence wasn't peace. It was the calm before a storm. I had lived long enough to know when people were planning behind closed doors. My gut told me that their quietness wasn't surrender. It was calculation. Every sip of coffee that morning felt heavy, as though I was swallowing stones. Something was coming, and I needed to be ready. 2 days later, I found a letter slipped under my door, stamped with the county office seal. At first, I thought it was just routine property tax information, but as my eyes scanned the pages, the words twisted into something sharp and venomous. My name was on a property transfer document signed, dated, and filed. My signature, except it wasn't mine. My hand shook as I traced the ink on the page. Every curve of the L in Luther, the slant of the Avery, all of it looked close, but not close enough. Whoever had done this thought they were clever. They thought an old man wouldn't notice the difference, that I'd simply accept it as paperwork I'd forgotten to sign. My chest tightened. Carla. It had to be her and Marco. They had grown bold enough to strip me of my home while I still breathed. The same daughter whose education I had paid for by working double shifts, whose wedding reception I funded, whose bills I covered when she needed a little extra. And now she had repaid me with betrayal so deep it cut through bone. I didn't waste another second. I tucked the letter into my coat pocket and drove straight into town, hands gripping the wheel tighter than they had in years. Attorney Fields had been a young lawyer once, green and eager. When I helped him with his first real case, he'd never forgotten the favor. Now, I needed him to return it. He ushered me into his office, and the moment his eyes fell on the document, his jaw set. "Luther, this is a forgery," he said firmly. "There's no doubt. See here, the loop in that is inconsistent. Whoever copied your signature didn't study it carefully." My head spun, but there was no room for weakness. "So, they've already filed this." He nodded grimly. "It's in the system, but it's not final. If we move quickly, we can challenge it. We'll need proof your authentic signatures, handwriting samples, maybe even bank records. Anything that shows consistency." Rage burned under my skin, but beneath it was heartbreak. My own blood would stoop this low. Attorney Fields put a hand on my shoulder. "This is serious, Luther. But you have the truth on your side. That's stronger than any forged pen stroke." The rest of that afternoon was a blur of gathering papers. Old checkbooks, tax returns, even birthday cards I had signed over the years. Every document became a weapon. Every line of ink another brick in the wall of defense I was building. As I spread them across my kitchen table, the memories pressed in. Each page reminded me of a sacrifice made for Carla tuition checks, mortgage payments, small loans that were never repaid. My life was written in those documents, and now they were evidence against her. By nightfall, I felt the weight of betrayal settle into something sharper resolve. If this was war, then I would fight it with truth. The phone rang just as I was about to pour myself a glass of bourbon. It was Attorney Fields. His voice was low, urgent. "Meet me first thing tomorrow. I have evidence you'll want to see." Sleep didn't come that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the sound of my late wife's voice echoing in memory. "Always protect what you built." The papers were forged. The trust was broken, and by sunrise, the real fight would begin. The whispers started before sunrise. I could feel them in the way the neighbors glanced across their lawns, the way conversations hushed when I walked by. It wasn't just silence, it was suspicion. Word had spread that I had signed away my house willingly, that maybe I was slipping, too old to remember what I had done. The lies carried Carla's tone. I'd know it anywhere. She and Marco had wasted no time poisoning the well. One morning, I heard Mrs. Dalton mutter to her husband as I fetched my mail. Poor man, losing his mind. Probably doesn't even know what he's signing anymore. The words cut deeper than the autumn chill. My fists clenched, but I said nothing. Anger is dangerous when it isn't ready. By noon, Attorney Fields called me into his office. He slid a folder across the desk. Face grim. Inside were forged receipts payments I had never authorized. Emails I had never written. Carla had manufactured evidence to prove her story, to show I had given her everything freely. My breath caught. She wants to paint you as incompetent. Fields warned. If this sticks, you could lose more than your home, you could lose your credibility. I thought I had known betrayal, but this was something crueler. A daughter's hands had forged my signature, and now her voice was forging my reputation. The real sting came at church that Sunday. I had barely settled into the pew when Carla rose, voice sharp and loud enough to echo off the stained glass. My father squandered the family fortune, she declared, eyes sweeping across the congregation. Heads turned, my chest tightened as whispers surged. Not one person stood for me, even the pastor's gaze slid away. That silence burned more than the accusation itself. I sat frozen, heart pounding, until a soft voice broke through the noise later that afternoon. Mrs. Henderson, my elderly neighbor, leaned in quietly. I saw Marco in your study weeks ago, late at night. He didn't belong there. Her eyes held mine with quiet certainty. For the first time in days, hope stirred. Proof was out there. Someone had seen the cracks in their lies, but the reprieve didn't last long. That evening, Carla called another gathering, this time of extended family. Her voice rang with confidence as she promised to present papers that prove everything. My jaw tightened. If it was war she wanted, then I would bring the kind of truth that couldn't be silenced. The house was quiet when I returned that night, but inside me nothing was still. Rage burned low and steady, but alongside it, resolve. She thought she could shame me into silence, erase decades of sacrifice with forged paper and poisonous words. She was wrong. The next battle wouldn't be behind closed doors. It would be in front of every pair of eyes that mattered. Sunday afternoon settled over Asheville like a held breath. Carla's living room felt staged for a verdict, sofas pushed back, relatives in a horseshoe facing the center. Marco paced with his phone. I came in last, coat buttoned, bruises the yellow of old paper. In my hand was a locked briefcase set by my shoe. Carla stood with the ease of someone who expects obedience. Before we begin, she announced, remember we are family, and family has to deal with uncomfortable truths. She lifted a stack of papers from the mantel and looked at me with pity that felt purchased. My father has been confused. He signed certain documents. He doesn't remember. Marco stepped forward, waving printouts, emails authorizing transfers so he can rest, receipts for repairs he asked us to handle. Murmurs rose. Someone asked if I had seen a doctor. Carla approached, fanning her papers like playing cards. We can keep this dignified if you confirm it. Tell them you signed. Her smile held. I let the room fill. The clock ticked. When the noise reached the edge of itself, I leaned down, turned a small key, and opened the briefcase. Every head tilted. On top lay a county notice embossed with a raised seal. Beside it, a letter from Attorney Fields, notarized. Under those, enlarged copies of my signature from bank forms and contracts, each ringed in blue and initialed by a handwriting examiner. I passed the county record to my sister-in-law. Registrar shows no valid transfer of my interest. I said, not last month. Not ever. I slid Fields' letter across the table. Independent examiner confirms the signature on your deed isn't mine. Marco laughed. You're desperate, Mrs. Henderson spoke from a dining chair near the doorway. I saw you. Marco, she said. 3 Fridays ago, about 8. You came through the side gate, the sticky one. You went into Mr. Avery's study and left with a folder. You told me you were dropping off casserole pans. He doesn't own casserole pans. The room turned toward her as if truth carried gravity. Fields stepped from the bookcase, where he had been waiting. He raised a clear sleeve. Ring camera images from Mr. Avery's porch, he said. Timestamp matches. He held up another page. And the emails you've shown trace back to this house's Wi-Fi, not Mr. Avery's. The room changed temperature. Whispering stopped, and the lilies on the mantel seemed to lean our way. Carla stared at the pages as if they were a foreign alphabet. You're coaching people, she said. You always knew how to make folks feel sorry for you. I've spent my life making things stand. I answered. Houses, paychecks, your chances. My hand rested on the forged deed. I don't need to stage pity. I have paper. A cousin asked if this would hold in court. Fields answered with words sturdy enough to sit on authentication. Chain of custody. Expert report. Then he added a single syllable that changed the angle of everyone's shoulders. Yes. Silence settled cleanly. In it lived the small sounds, sofa springs, a spoon on porcelain, someone breathing too fast. I remembered sanding the crib rails so Carla wouldn't catch a splinter, taking a second shift so her tuition cleared. The 15 slaps finding my face like a metronome no one else tried to stop. The room that had once watched me break now watched something else paper cutting without raising its voice. Carla's mouth tightened. She tried again, lower. He's still confused. He needs help. We were helping. Help tells the truth, I said. Control tells stories. I closed the briefcase and stood. You called this meeting to warn the family about me. Now they've seen why I warned you. Marco reached for the deed. I set my palm on it first. Don't. He retreated a half step. The first he'd given me in months. Relatives shifted in their chairs. Some looked at the ceiling. Others looked at me the way you look at a house still standing after the wind has had its say. Mrs. Henderson folded her notebook. Fields slid the documents back into order. I turned to the room. I'm not here to win a shouting match, I said. I'm here to seat a fact. It will not leave when I do. I nodded to Fields. Copies will be filed tomorrow. The light from the maple moved across the carpet. Carla's face carried a fear she tried to pass off as anger. Marco's confidence flickered like a bulb that doesn't screw in all the way. Their posture said they had built a stage. Their eyes said they had measured the planks wrong. I put on my coat. You wanted everyone to see me fall apart. I told them. But what you've seen is what does not. A few relatives stood as if to follow. Others stayed frozen, loyal to the habit of silence even when it no longer protected them. At the door I paused. The next part isn't about who can talk the loudest, I said. It's about signatures and records and the porch light of a neighbor who decided to look. I opened the door and the Sunday cold touched my cheek where the last bruise was fading. Breath came out white and honest. Their lies were exposed under their own roof, and the fear shifted to new shoulders. Not a victory shout, a balance found, for now, by ink, witness, and a fact that fit its chair. What happens next will be up to them. Yes, but it will also be up to me. Outside. The maple rattled. No one followed. For the first time in weeks, the weight in my chest shifted from dread to steady purpose. Light held, just barely. The week that followed the confrontation felt like standing in the ruins after a storm quiet, but the damage plain to see. The house was still, yet the silence seemed to weigh more than the shouting had. Each phone call that came after that meeting carried either a whisper of apology or the chill of avoidance. Some of my kin reached out late at night, their voices softer than the static on the line, saying they were sorry for standing by Carla's side. Others, ones I had fed at my table, refused to pick up the phone at all. That silence stung deeper than any words. Relatives who had once gathered around my kitchen table now split into factions. I could hear it in their tones. My nephew called, saying, "Uncle Luther, you know I've always respected you. But Carla, she says you're slipping." His voice carried hesitation, as if weighing loyalty against convenience. Others were braver, saying outright, "You stood your ground, and we're behind you." The family tree I had nurtured with sacrifice was now cracked down the middle. Where I had hoped for unity, there were jagged edges cutting me from both sides. The ripples didn't stay within the bloodline. By Sunday, whispers floated through the pews of church. Folks who once smiled at me now glanced sideways, their eyes darting between me and Carla. She strutted down the aisle with Marco at her side, as if daring the town to believe her version of events. But small towns remember. They notice. Some leaned toward one another, whispering that Carla's words didn't match the man they knew. Marco's grin looked hollow under the weight of their scrutiny. What they tried to paint as my downfall began to look like their unraveling. Support came from places I hadn't expected. Mrs. Henderson stopped me on the sidewalk, her hands warm around mine. "Don't let them shame you. Luther, people see the truth clearer than you think." Soon after, Attorney Fields called to confirm that witnesses were willing to give statements. Bit by bit, voices that had once been silent rose up in my defense. Each word of support was like a stone beneath my feet, steadying me for the fight that wasn't yet finished. But Carla wasn't done. One evening, as I stepped outside to collect the mail, her car rolled up the driveway. She didn't bother stepping out, just lowered the window enough to let her words cut through the air. "This isn't over. You'll regret crossing me, Dad." Her eyes burned with fury, the kind only bred from pride threatened. The hum of her engine faded into the distance, but the echo of her threat stayed. It was sharper than any silence I had endured. The family was divided, the neighbors were watching, and my daughter had just promised war. The courthouse doors were heavier than I remembered. Cold marble stretched across the floor, each step echoing like it carried more than my weight it carried every year I had given to a daughter who now stood against me. The hall smelled faintly of polish and old paper, the scent of justice and judgment intertwined. My palms were damp, but resolve steadied my spine. This wasn't about property alone. This was about dignity, truth, and the promise I once whispered to my late wife: I would not let our legacy be stolen. Inside the courtroom, sunlight streamed through tall windows, but the light felt sharp, unforgiving. Carla sat near the front, draped in a tailored suit that screamed confidence. Her husband Marco leaned close, smirking as though the outcome was already written in their favor. They barely glanced at me, which only deepened the resolve in my chest. Attorney Fields, calm and deliberate, patted my shoulder before we approached the bench. When the judge entered, silence fell. His gavel struck wood with a crisp authority, and suddenly my private war had become a public reckoning. Carla's performance began almost instantly. Her voice trembled with practiced fragility, claiming I had grown forgetful, senile, unable to manage finances. She wept at the right moments, hands clutching forged papers as though they were sacred truth. Marco handed her the documents like a stage assistant, his grin smug. I felt my jaw tighten, but I held still. Let them dance, I thought. The truth has a rhythm of its own. Fields stood next, his words steady and sharp. He pointed to inconsistencies, dates that didn't align, signatures that wavered unnaturally. Carla's confidence flickered. She stumbled over her explanations, her voice rising with defensiveness. Marco whispered furiously into her ear, but the judge's eyes narrowed. For the first time, I saw cracks in the performance. Then came Mrs. Henderson. She walked to the stand with slow steps, her hands clasped as though holding courage itself. Her testimony was simple. She had seen Marco slip into my study weeks earlier when I was out in the yard. Her voice didn't waver. The courtroom shifted. The whispering grew louder. Carla's face paled. Marco's jaw clenched. The judge leaned forward, ordering a forensic examination of the documents. My heart hammered. But this time with hope, the tide was turning. And then Carla broke. She slammed her hands against the table, her mask slipping away. Her voice, shrill and furious, tore through the courtroom. "This old man doesn't deserve any of it," gasps spread across the gallery. Her polished facade shattered in an instant, revealing the anger she had worked so hard to conceal. The judge's gavel pounded again for order. But it was too late. Everyone had seen her true face. I didn't smile, but a quiet strength filled me. For the first time in this battle, it wasn't just me against her lies. The truth itself had taken the stand beside me. The morning the report was due, I sat outside Judge Harrison's chambers with Attorney Fields at my side. The courthouse was silent except for the occasional creak of old wood benches and the echo of footsteps down the hall. Days of restless nights weighed heavy, each hour dragging me back to the sight of Carla's hand striking my face and the shame that followed. Yet now, it wasn't bruises I feared, it was the truth wrapped in a sealed envelope. When the clerk finally entered with a thick envelope stamped with the court's seal, the air shifted. Even Marco stopped whispering to Carla. Every eye in the chamber followed as the envelope was handed to the judge. Judge Harrison broke the seal, slid the pages free, and nodded to the forensic expert. A tall man in glasses, his voice steady, began to explain. Ink analysis confirms the signatures attributed to Mr. Avery were applied within the past 2 weeks. Document seals show irregularities inconsistent with county records, and handwriting comparison reveals significant discrepancies. Then came the line I had waited for. "These documents are fraudulent." The courtroom gasped. The sound seemed to ripple through the benches, breaking the silence like a stone through glass. For a moment, I closed my eyes. Relief flooded in. Not sweet, but sharp, like finally pulling a thorn that had been festering for years. Carla's chair scraped as she shot to her feet. Her voice wavered between panic and rage. "He made me do it. He threatened me. He wanted to hide money." Marco shook his head quickly, turning pale. "No, it was her. I told her not to. She handled everything." Their alliance collapsed in seconds. Fingers pointed. Voices rose. Lies tangled into knots too messy to untie. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order. But their shouting betrayed them more than any evidence could. Through it all, I stayed seated, hands folded on the table. Watching my daughter unravel in front of strangers should have felt like victory. Instead, sorrow pressed heavier than triumph. The girl I once carried on my shoulders was now clawing at the very foundation of truth just to escape accountability. When the shouting subsided, Judge Harrison's voice was firm. "This court will not be misled by forged documents. Sentencing for fraud and contempt will proceed." Carla's face twisted, eyes burning at me with hatred I had never seen before. She hissed across the room, her voice trembling. "You'll regret this, Dad. You'll regret crossing me." But the threat no longer landed. For the first time in years, regret wasn't mine to carry. The gavel struck again. Court adjourned until sentencing. As I rose, the truth hung in the air heavier than her words. My empire wasn't money or land. It was integrity. And that morning, it stood taller than her lies. The courthouse felt colder that morning than any autumn breeze outside could ever make it. Marble walls reflected faint echoes of footsteps as people filed into the chamber. I sat still, my hands folded, my back straight despite the weight of everything that had led to this day. Family members and neighbors whispered around me, their voices a mix of curiosity, judgment, and pity. The gavel struck, sharp and final, silencing all. Judge Harrison's steady voice cut through the tension order in the court. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. I could feel every pair of eyes resting on me, on Carla, on Marco. It wasn't just another court session. It was sentencing day, and with it, the end of a war I never wished to fight. Judge Harrison began with a slow recounting of the charges: fraud, perjury, coercion, and exploitation of an elder. His words struck like hammers, not because I hadn't heard them before, but because they now carried the final weight of judgment. Carla sat rigid, eyes flashing with fury, while Marco's face carried the emptiness of a man who knew the ground was slipping beneath him. My daughter's lawyer tried to argue leniency, claiming she acted out of desperation, that I had been difficult, controlling, but Judge Harrison's voice grew firmer. Desperation does not justify criminal deceit, especially against one's own parent. Carla's shoulders twitched. Marco shifted uncomfortably, muttering under his breath. The tension in the room mounted, until the judge finally delivered the verdict. Carla Denaro, for the crimes of fraud, perjury, and attempted exploitation, you are hereby sentenced to prison. The length of your sentence reflects not only your actions, but the betrayal of trust that magnifies them. The words echoed like thunder. Carla gasped, eyes widening in disbelief. Marco, by contrast, exhaled as though a stone had dropped from his chest, only to hear his own fate immediately after probation, community service, and public record of disgrace. My chest tightened not in triumph, but in the painful clarity of what this day meant. My child, the one I raised, the one I sacrificed decades for, was being led into chains of her own making. They tried to bury me alive, but in the end, it was their lies that had been buried by the law. As the deputies moved toward her, Carla exploded. She shouted across the courtroom, her voice breaking with rage and grief. I did it for the family. You ruined us. Dad, you ruined everything. The chamber erupted in murmurs, gasps, and scattered shaking of heads. I stood, slowly, meeting her eyes. The fire in her gaze was the same one I remembered from her childhood, when she fought tooth and nail for the smallest things. But this time, it was poisoned by greed, by pride unchecked. No. Carla, I said softly, though the entire room heard it. You ruined yourself when you forgot what family means. Her sobs echoed as they pulled her away. Marco sat slumped, avoiding everyone's eyes. Outside the courthouse, sunlight spilled across the steps, warm and golden. It touched my skin like a benediction after years of shadows. Community members who once whispered doubt now nodded. Some even stopped to shake my hand. You stood for all of us. Luther, one neighbor said quietly. You reminded us that truth still matters. I looked up at the sky, feeling the weight lift slowly, but surely. The years of sacrifice, the sting of betrayal, the humiliation I endured, all of it had led to this moment of clarity. Family built on greed will always collapse, but dignity, once defended, shines brighter than any lie, carrying no bitterness, only peace. I walked away knowing that while my daughter had lost herself, I had found something far greater: my freedom, my voice, my place in the truth.